No, no. I think this one, I'm just gonna make it all, I'm just gonna be a list you have to pick. All right, so. I think wait a minute. Monday is going to be registration that the council is coming out and talking about next year. And Tuesday, well, the test. And so, sounds good for everybody? You should have the review list. I put a bunch of asterisks on there. I'll narrow it down a little bit. Maybe tomorrow, but for sure Monday. And even if there's an asterisk, it doesn't mean it won't be on the test. And, you know, it won't be like a multiple choice. I think I have like 20 multiple choice and like 10 match.
Oh,
And the match will be really basic, the multiple choice will be a little more complex, which you expect, and the short IDs. And how many short IDs would you like?
Zero.
Let's go between 4 and 40.
let's see.
4 plus 0 is 40, right? There's a math feature right across the hall.
Seems like. I didn't know
Check
that.
out the calculator. Yes, 4 plus 0 is 40. Math is so easy. People complain about it. Come on. Her freshman just looked at me.
You go there frequently.
Huh?
Harass them.
Sometimes. They need this.
We should extort those though. There's no
Do that after the AP exam. We'll start extorting. Questions. Oh, on zoning rules. We would never do that. All right, so that'll be the test, and I think it should be really basic, and then we go to war. Go to war, and then the 20s, and
Go to war with the freshmen?
Huh?
Go to war with the freshmen?
with freshmen, close enough. All right, so where do we finish it here? Did we get to Nicaragua? Did I show you this?
Yes.
So where was the area? Oh, what was it called where the expansion of the Monroe Doctrine to say the US can intervene anywhere? What was that called? Yeah, Roosevelt Corollary. The Platt Amendment made Cuba a what? A protectorate. And what was the base the United States set up and kept, even though the lease has expired? Yeah, Guantanamo Bay. What were the court cases that said the Constitution did not follow the flag? Something. That's what I heard. Exactly right. What are the cases called? Someone said it, the insular cases. Very good. And where was the horrific insurrection that the US would use all the things it claimed to oppose?
Philippines.
The Filipino insurrection, the Philippines. And, what country did Marines go in and took over their financial system? Dominican Republic and Nicaragua too. I guess I would have one right there. And basically, what was the banana company called? And they marketed their bananas under what name? United. Chiquita. United Fruits Chiquita. But they were banks. Remember, debt, banks. So I showed you that for the pirates, right? We got to that. That one always fascinates me. So the most decorated soldier in American history up before World War II was an officer who would eventually become a general by the name of, this was really his name, Smedley Butler. And he got almost all of his medals in these operations in Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua. And he would later look back and he would write a book saying, I was a gangster. He knew exactly what he was doing. And so Butler's gonna be really important. Butler will come down and hit, Butler will also be, there's gonna be an attempt by some of the richest Americans to overthrow the government of the United States in 1933, place for the dictatorship. Smedley Butler would be involved. I wonder if there's a frame of reference today. Moving on. Let's get to Panama. Let me add one more thing. I am owly today. Irritable. I'm just warning you. I'm very irritable. I've been irritable for a while, but I'm very irritable today. And I'll tell you why. Because this is something very personally close to me. So of all the cuts that are happening by appears to be one person or his 20-year-olds, they just cut off money for Alzheimer's. And that is very full speed. And so I'm out. So I'm just letting you know, if I snap all of a sudden, yeah, there's a reason why. Hey, we all have issues. We have to come in and you have a job or whatever. I'm just letting you know. Let's get to the Panama Canal. And I've had to fill out the first period too, because I snapped at somebody. And it made them sad. I felt bad. Because it wasn't their fault, I was just angry. So, the Panama Canal, that's a classic example of being diplomacy. Panama was a province of Colombia. Here's a map of Colombia when Panama was still there. There are no roads connecting Bogota to Panama City. Now, there was a kind of an independence movement in Panama, but not a big deal. But you can see right there by that map how much shorter it would be to go from San Francisco to the East Coast if there's a canal. And that would be a big issue during the war or the Spanish-American War to get ships from the Pacific to the Atlantic. But there have been attempts for a long time. There was an attempt to dig a canal across Nicaragua. It was a little bit flatter than a lot of lakes, but it turned out to be just too big. And a French company tried to do one right here, the same spot the regular canal would go, but it was just too much for them. And they went rogue. It was the same guy, the same company, and people would do the Suez Canal, the French and British canal. Suez Canal was basically a ditch through a desert. This has to go over a mountain, but it's relatively narrow. Well, the United States then tried to figure out a way to get Colombia to sell us a hunk of Colombia in Panama to dig a canal. So, what would it be? The United States offered Colombia about $10 million. And Colombia turned it down. The Colombian Parliament correctly realized that the United States is going to make a lot more money than that off of canal by charging fees. And to give the United States a big hunk of Colombia so they can profit from it. But you can imagine how Roosevelt was furious. He thought he had a deal from them and he would decide to use American force. He tried to intimidate. That didn't work at first. Here's a cartoon of Roosevelt in the buckskin of the Rough Rider garb, little Columbia. Clever cartoon. But then something shocking, I put quotes here, happened. All of a sudden, a revolution happened in Panama. Can you believe it? Freedom fighters in Panama rose up and overthrew the Colombian rule and declared independence. Declared independence from Colombia. And this is, I'm sure, just a coincidence. US Navy forces happened to be on both sides of the isthmus. And they joined the revolution to make sure that Colombia could not send forces to Panama City to put down the rebellion. And the rebellion actually weren't that many people. It was just a few individuals. A lot of them were involved in that canal thing, which I know seems kind of weird. But just go with me on this. Yeah. Now, the United States immediately proclaimed support for the freedom fighters and the independence movement, just like the Declaration of Independence. Roosevelt even wired down congratulations to the freedom fighters for fighting for freedom against Colombian tyranny. The only problem was the telegram arrived a week before the revolution began. Roosevelt had the wrong date. Do you get my point there? Who engineered this rebellion? The United States, along with a few elite Colombians who would profit off of it. So the United States helped overthrow the government and put in a pro-American. Remember, this kind of happened in Hawaii, but President Cleveland wasn't involved. So this time, we're involved. Now, I can tell you that this will never happen again in Panama. Oh, no, wait, it'll even happen in Panama. It will happen many, many, many times in history. The United States is going to start overthrowing a lot of governments. We'll get to some really big ones that will forever change the world, like overthrowing the democracy in Iran. I'm sure that will have no consequence down the road. Yes, we're kind of getting to things. We're leading up to stuff. So, back to this. Immediately, the Hay-Bonavilla Treaty was signed. Bonavilla was one of the people working on the canal with the Americans, and then would become the Panamanian foreign minister. It's weird. The United States would give $10 million and an additional $250,000 a year. So more than what they offered Colombia to the new country of Panama. And this would later be doubled because it was obvious that the United States was going to clean up on this canal. There was going to be a 100-year lease on a canal zone. on both sides where the canal would be a US territory for 100 years. Actually, that would last, get my years right, about 66 years. But anyways. And the joke was, well, in fact, Roosevelt talked about the freedom fighters, and he wanted to maybe talk to the brand new thing called the International Court in the Netherlands. And his Secretary of State, John Hay, said, don't take this with legalities, Mr. President. You stole it fair and square. So they knew exactly what they did. I love these, stole it fair and square. That's what we call irony. But Colonel Walter Gottos of the Army Corps of Engineers would be sent 3 years after they started digging it and working on the canal in 1904. And 1907, he went down because it was just a disaster. The American workers were dying in droves of yellow fever and sickened by malaria, and they had no idea what was causing it. It turned out to be a much more arduous task digging through mountains than to dig 4 massive blocks. You have the canal cut through the mountain, you go through the bottom. It was a technological feat that they weren't prepared for. Galtos would be the engineer. I'll show you his picture in just an example. Oh, I forgot to show you the clever cartoon. See Roosevelt digging the canal and dumping the dirt off Bogota, the capital of Colombia. Everybody knew what was happening here. But Galtos would organize the canal using more Panamanian workers. And there was work of 2 doctors, Dr. Walter Reed in Havana and William Gorgas in the Panama Canal. And they figured out, starting with Reed, what was spreading yellow fever and malaria. What was spreading? Mosquitoes. And so what do you do about mosquitoes? You get rid of standing water wherever you can, make it hard for mosquito larvae to spread. That is why today, the US Army Hospital, their big centerpiece, showpiece hospital for the United States Army in Washington, D.C. is Walter Reed Hospital because of this work. And it's a big achievement. Now, looking back, all of this, I guess every one of you do, mosquito spread this. But it was revolutionary. And this is just at a time for germ theory and like wearing a mask they realized was working. And then mosquitoes, just so many scientific achievements. You can start seeing like life expectancy begin to slowly tick up. And then wait till antibiotics and vaccines. Well, so here's Teddy Roosevelt in 1904 going down to the canal zone. Roosevelt would be the first president in American history to leave the continental United States while in office. Now, he never actually left US territory. He rode on a US cruiser, a Navy ship, and then he got onto the canal zone, which was technically a US territory. But still, not the country. Does anybody know the first American president, sitting president, to leave the US and step foot on another country? No. It happens all the time now. Woodrow Wilson, with the negotiation of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, with the treaties that we call the Treaty of Versailles, he would step foot in England before he went to France. Kind of weird to think about, it just happens all the time now. When McKinley was assassinated, who assassinated McKinley? Okay, I'll tell you the name, John Gotts. But he was a what? Bomb throwing anarchist. And an immigrant that he was nativist. When McKinley shook hands with the Premier of Canada, they went to a bridge over the Niagara River and they both reached their hand over and shake right on the border so he wouldn't cross the border. That just seems kind of silly, but that's what he did the day before he was assassinated. So back to this, that's the canal zone, and there had to be massive locks to go over this continental divide here. And they had to cut through this. Now, I've never been to the canal. I have friends who have gone through it, and it sounds really cool. And the locks are just massive to move you up the mountains, and then the lakes right here. It's an incredible achievement. On the right, that's Gottos. On the left is how they got rid of mosquitoes. They went through all the swamps and standing water, and they had thousands of men, and a man right here with oil, a little spray can. We just sprayed it all over every dead sea. That oil would cover it, no oxygen would get in and kill not just the mosquito larvae, but everything in that water. It's pretty horrific. I don't want to understate the scientific achievement by dwelling on this horrific practice, but it's horrific. And it got enough to it could work. In 1914, the Panama Canal was opened. Right to 1914. And that's what the canal, or that's how wide the canal was. It had to be pretty narrow to cut through the mountains. Well, by World War II, this was causing a problem. That is the USS New Jersey, battleship made during World War II. And it had to be narrower than what they wanted a battleship to be to fit in the canal. Look how narrow it was. After World War II, at first super aircraft carriers, then super oil tankers, super container ships, they couldn't fit. And that's why the canal would be, well, a new canal would be made parallel to it. That's why, and or using the same canal path. It just depends where it is. And in 1979, the United States would ratify a treaty giving the canal to Panama. It's in their territory, they own it, but there's a part of that treaty that says if the canal is threatened, the US can intervene. And it is that element of the treaty that President Trump is threatening to use to invade Panama to take the canal. So that's in the treaty that was ratified back in 1979. But this is the new canal, and it's much wider. And it goes through this lake. The problem is, with climate change, there's been more droughts here, and it's more shallow. And it's actually very close to closing off right now because of the drought. I mean, they need rain and water. It's just, we have a changing world, obviously. So, after Roosevelt left office, basic diplomacy did not go away. The Taft would rename it dollar diplomacy. And the idea was to push for stability for American business. It's all about American business and banking. And how they would control Latin American countries was through debt. Get them to borrow money and then say, hey, if you have trouble when you're paying back your bonds, what you owe, we'll help you. Do what we say. And debt became a massive hammer to control countries. The United States would use debt. Some of you might have heard of the International Monetary Fund that was created in 1944. That would be a massive hammer against countries that are in debt. Now, you might be thinking, hey, the United States is in debt. Well, we're in debt to ourselves, and we're in debt in dollars. Other countries are in debt for dollars too. But for example, Haiti doesn't make dollars. The US makes dollars. So we're in debt with stuff we make. That gives you a lot of flexibility. You just make more. And the issues that you can deal with the debt. Meaning we have a lot of flexibility that other countries don't. The debt is an issue because it could raise interest rates or inflation, but we make our dollar. So it gives us a lot of power. Back to this. Let's get to Asia. So Asia, while this is going on, we already talked a little bit about Chinese immigrants that would come over to the United States to build the railroads. Many stayed. I talked a little bit about that. Also, the Philippines, because it was during the war. But this shows the American attitude towards the Philippines. That's Uncle Sam carrying all these manufactured goods and using the Philippines as not only a market, but a stepping stone to the lucrative market in China. And the United States was not alone. You're going to have all these European powers that are trying to get into the Chinese market. Now, in the 18th century, China didn't want any trade from anyone. They thought we were so big and powerful. What do we want from Europe? These barbarians. And the British found something. East India Company, remember them with the Tea Act? Same company. Something they could grow in northern India and Afghanistan, places just north of it, that they could sell in China. Anybody know? Opium, an addicting drug. And that didn't just crack open the Chinese market, that broke China, the opium trade. And so it was all about this Chinese trade, and now it will be open with opium. I didn't mean to say it that way. Yes, that's our little adventure in Afghanistan. Lots of opium involved there. But that's going to lead to 2 opium wars that the British, with the help of the French, the Austrians, the Italians, the Germans, and the Americans, would defeat the vastly inferior Chinese fleet, and the US, they would sign a bunch of unequal trading. Thank you. Been waiting for this. You know why? Better keep. You figure it out.
Zero period, usually it's either like a student that's parking in a faculty lot or like you're just parking in the. So like, it's like the snow.
And then, yeah, parking, yeah. Did you see the pile of snow in the parking lot? There's a mountain of snow. And then when it gets 40 this weekend, it's going to slush. And then a ball of ice. This is gonna be so much fun. I gotta check. I couldn't believe second period, it's 28 degrees. Right now, 91, 30. 31 degrees. Okay, so all these unequal treaties with the Chinese will be very resentful, as any country would with these unequal treaties. And then another thing that happened, just to reveal at the same time, we mentioned this once before. It was called the Oriental by law, but everyone referred to it as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1887 to ban, for the most part, Chinese immigrants. The first really big nativist law in American history. Oriental, that term comes from the weird medieval maps where they oriented everything to the center of the universe, which was Jerusalem, AKA the East. So they just called everything in the East the Orient. That's going to have some negative connotations down the road, but that's where that came from. Here are a couple cartoons. Here is the wall reference, which never seems to go away, to keep out immigrants. Here's another one that's a horrific racialized caricature. And you notice these features almost are always the same, no matter where. I showed you this over and over again, and that's representing like Chinese as like a dragon coming in. What era is intensely racist? Well, in 1900, what's going to happen is a Boxer rebellion against the economic imperialism of these unequal treaties and mercenary activity. There was a lot of resentment in China over Protestant missionaries, most from Britain and the United States, and resentment against not only their trying to say that no matter what religion they were in China, because there's about 40 at this time religions in China, but either Buddhist or, for that matter, Muslim in Eastern China is something wrong with them, or that this took away power from the emperor. So there's a lot of anger, and so the emperor was had to sign all these treaties. It was actually the Emperor Dowager, and it was a complex there in China's history, but they indirectly supported these groups. They had these clubs, and they were martial arts clubs, clubs, get together. And they would organize in these clubs because the Europeans didn't know what was going to happen. And it would be a massive rebellion against foreign influence, uprising, led by groups. And one of the most famous there were groups near Hong Kong, so the British dubbed them. It was called, the best English translation in 1900 was, one of these martial arts societies was the Peaceful and Harmonious Fists. Well, they're fighters. The British are boxers. They fight. So, martial arts, boxers, Boxer Rebellion. And that's what it's going to be known, and it still is called that now everywhere, the Boxer Rebellion. And they rose up and attacked foreign traders, including American traders, merchants. These little enclaves in Chinese cities, or like merchant areas they would set up, or missionaries. And some would be murdered. And in fact, in Beijing, which at the time around the world they called Peking, except for in China, the embassies were besieged. There was an embassy legation where then all the major powers had embassies who were taking advantage of these unequal treaties. It was walled in, and they were besieged by boxers. And it's going to be dubbed 55 days in Peking because of the British bastardization and mispronunciation of Beijing. When I was in school, I didn't learn Beijing, which is closer to the actual pronunciation, still not quite correct, but I learned Peking. You know, that's what I learned because we still had that old pronunciation. So what happened was every great power sent troops. So it's like an opium war, a massive opium war. All the great powers intervened. The United States sent Marines. Every great power sent forces. And they landed. They landed on Beijing, like 100 miles from the shore. They landed and marched overland, defeating the Chinese forces because they had more advanced equipment. Another keys. Yeah. I don't mind doing this, but like, I mean, I guess I have to do this. But what is so mandatory right now? Like, I guess unless you're parked on top of a fire hydrant. Yeah, I mean, there's no way to take people out of class. I just find that fascinating. Moving on, they all intervened and they liberated the foreign legation. Here is an assemblage after, oh, let me jump the gun. I jumped the gun. Here is an American propaganda poster of this. And here's McKinley and Uncle Sam defeating the Boxers. And look how horrific they draw their faces, implying they butchered people and the heads are on spits. But not only that, look what they're standing on. An American flag wrapped around a butchered baby. And the mother is right there and see the knife about the flesh. So using these horrific references. And on the flag it says, I find this really funny in a way. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and treaty rights. We want our unequal treaties to exploit China. How dare you? Well, these are all the soldiers. So these are from all the great powers. Okay. Britain and British India. India was kind of like, yeah, Britain, which had a king, and then, or I'm sorry, at that time, a queen, and then the Queen of Britain was the Emperor of India. Complex form of imperialism. Who's that? That's an American soldier. Russian, German. Get my countries right here. French, Austrian, Italian, Japanese. I know they do it by height. I think it's kind of funny. And you know, the Americans and the Russians are the two tallest guys they could find. And then, by the way, the angles they're standing, they make them look even taller. Yeah, I know. That's pretty cool. Gotta admit, that's Italians. I mean, they're stylish. And this, right, this part. This is when they realized maybe we can't colonize China. China might be too difficult because they'll fight back. Well, Secretary of State John Hay, and this has happened because remember the Filipino insurrection is already going on, had come up with a suggestion that the European powers are like, hey, that sounds good, called the open door. And what it was economic imperialism of China. We won't, talking about the great powers, and I just showed you the 8 great powers. We won't colonize it, even though we'll kind of scoop up some areas, and Manchuria was open to the Russians. That was not considered part of China then. All the great powers can equally exploit China. All of them. So if there was a treaty signed for the British, that gave them huge trading advantages, so they could clean up and not obey Chinese law. It's called extraterritoriality. All the great powers would take advantage of this. Now, you know what, World War II there? In the 1930s, Japan said, you know, we're going to start taking China. And the heck with these treaties. And that would be the stepping stones towards World War II in the Pacific. Remember what I told you. All wars for empire. And it would start with, well, it's going to be hell for China. And I must add this one thing today. This is very important for Chinese economic policy and political policy. China is still very much focused for very good reason about the Opium Wars or the Boxer Rebellion or these unequal treaties that happened afterwards. This will be one of the justifications for the communist revolution and almost certainly is a major part of their policy today. Now, this is something that people know in China, the Boxer Rebellion, and remember how they were treated. And so there's going to be an element of Chinese foreign policy that will be insular to not allow this again. Remember, insular like an island. That's one of the reasons why China has such a massive trade imbalance. They have a lot of exports and very few imports. Because they don't want to be put in another situation like what happened here. It's focused on. This has negative connotations because the Chinese economy right now is very shaky because of this. In fact, it's really rough shape right at this moment. But that's part of the reason why. So let's get to Japan. Japan had isolated themselves before 1853. In fact, they were basically still medieval. There was an emperor, but it was run by knights. You might have heard of shoguns and samurai. We're not going to go into details of Japanese history. But Commodore Matthew Perry was an American commander. Commodore was a temporary rank. And he led a small U.S. fleet of these new steamboats into Tokyo Bay, Edo Bay as it's called, for one reason, to open up harbor access for whaling ships, for whalers. By the 1900s, or by the 19th century, U.S. whaling ships and British whaling ships had pretty much killed most of the easily catch whale in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. So now they were going all the way around the world to go get whales in the Pacific. Remember, that was the reason for why he didn't become a protectorate, and that was one of the arguments to take Alaska. So they opened up, and this opened up trade. And Japan now had a real problem because they could see what was happening around the world. They had isolated themselves, but are they going to be the next colonial or victim of colonialism? And there was actually going to be a pretty nasty civil war in Japan. But Japan is going to look at Perry as being kind of a hero because he forced them to open up and modernize. So here's a picture of what Perry looked like. And this is a picture of Perry in a Japanese textbook from the 1930s. And look how they draw Perry. Isn't that amazing how they draw him? Since he's a hero, what do? Heroes to the Japanese, they make him what? Yeah, more Japanese. It's, once again, this kind of nationalistic, and it's very racial. I just find that really fascinating. So Japan began to modernize very fast. It's going to be called the Meiji Restoration. And in fact, they would fight a war. Here is the court of Japan. And you're going to have people with German and British style uniforms with the Japanese emperor. Here, new factories here. The Japanese army, now beginning to modernize, defeated China. And that blew people away. Maybe they could see because of, think about social Darwinism. Well, they would think, well, of course, a European power could beat China. But Japan? China was huge. And now Japan was on the world stage. Out of this, they would get most of Korea, would become a Japanese colony, and the island of Formosa. Formosa. You have to move your car?
No, it's fine.
They said you could park there? So they sent you up to the office to tell you
Yes.
can't move yours?
Yes, and I went up there and there was like 3 other people that were up there moving my phone. Yeah, no, wait, so they got really pissed at me.
They what?
They got really pissed at me. Where did you find? Well, listen,
Stocks.
and I was like, geez, what was that serious? My zero here.
That will teach you.
Yeah, I guess.
See, I'm all, if you park in the wrong place, they tow you to an undisclosed location, you have to figure it out. That's what I think. Who agrees with me? That's a great idea. And they just tow you off someplace in the United States. And you'll never do it again.
Yeah, that's true, because I don't have a car.
Exactly. That's science. So, anybody know what Formosa is? The island of Formosa today. Someone said? Yeah, that's Taiwan. So, Manchuria, both Russia and Japan became in conflict with this. And that will erupt into a massive war. And in a way, a precursor to World War I. The casualties in the fighting were so horrible, and the cost. The Russo-Japanese War. Now, let's remember, does the winner of the war, is that first or second?
Okay.
So who won? It shocked everybody. So it's all about Manchuria. And those are Russian forces. And I should add, they were just using the modern weapons of war, machine guns, high explosive artillery, and the casualties were horrendous. But the Japanese had an advantage. Most of the Russian population and most of their army was in European side of Russia. The Trans-Siberian Railroad, which was just being built, wasn't finished. So they had a long ways to go. And Japan started the war by a sneak attack, a surprise attack on the Russian fleet at their base, which was then called Port Arthur, right here. Taking them by surprise using new weapons called torpedoes, and they knocked out the Russian fleet. Now let me think. Might this be a warning about a Japanese surprise attack in the future? I don't know. I'm not. Can anyone think of what I'm referring to? Am I just obviously what attack am I talking about? Okay, so and most of the battles, bloody, horrible things, but the Russian army would fall. But Russia would decide to counterattack, and they sent their Baltic fleet all the way around the world to what's called the Battle of Tsushima. Here's a picture of a Russian poster, and showing the Russian fleet, and look how they draw the Russian sailor knocking out the Japanese fleet, and once again, one of those horrible caricatures. This should show the racial superiority of Europeans. Remember social Darwinism. Well, here's the map. It took 6 months, 7 months, and they went all the way around to attack here. The British wouldn't let them use the Suez Canal because Britain was allied with Japan. Why? Fear of Russia. One small, they're called battle cruisers, squad, armored cruiser went through there, or Britain went along. The French were allied with the Russians. Not that France and Russia liked each other, but they both hated each other. So they went all the way around and were all the way to Vladivostok, right here at the Strait of Tsushima, and the Japanese fleet attacked them and destroyed them. This is one of the most decisive naval victories in history. And this would lead the stepping stones to a series of events that would lead to the Russian Revolution. We're getting to World War I, II, which would be a bigger stepping stone. There'd be a revolution in Russia because of this, called 1905. A humiliating defeat for Russia that the Russian Empire never recovered from. Now, I know some of you are thinking, I don't understand what happened in the Battle of Tsushima. Well, I found you an easy to follow map of the battle. So this should sum it up pretty easily. You can see where the Japanese fleet crosses the T in naval battle, right?
They're squares.
It's right here. Cross the T. Yeah, I love naval battle. Naval battle maps make no sense at all. The blue are the Russians. So this changed the point of view of everyone. So here you have this. Here's Asian for the Asiatics, and now Japan and China are close, which wasn't true. But this was in a U.S. comic. See the Russian bear? Knocked out. Here, Russia getting knocked out by little China. And in Russia's corner is France, and Japan's corner is Britain. All of a sudden, overnight, Japan is now a threat to European and American expansion. Overnight, Japan is powerful. And Roosevelt got a coup. He was able to get the treaty to be negotiated in Portsmouth, Maine. And he would win the first Nobel Peace Prize. Offered Nobel left an endowment for a peace prize because he felt guilty that his invention was so awful. What was his invention? Dynamite. He thought that would end war. No one would be so crazy to continue war with dynamite and smokeless powder. Oh, yeah. He misunderestimated humans. So, it's underestimated. George W. Bush. So, there's Roosevelt. And the treaty, Japan felt they were snubbed. And Japan will be very resentful of this treaty. There'll be many more things that would make Japan resentful over the next 25 years. I think you get what I'm leading to. And one more thing. Germany, their Kaiser would dub Japan the Yellow Peril, using once again that racialized skin tone that you remember dividing people by color of skin, which doesn't really make sense, but That's not the skin tone, but that's it. Because now they are a threat. Germany had colonies right here, islands. Here's American colonies, French, British. In fact, that is a cartoon showing now Japan's growing threat over the Pacific. And that represents the monsters. So in 1907, Roosevelt sent the newest ships in the United States Navy, painted white, peace, around the world on an expedition to show American power they've arrived on the world sea. But the big thing is to intimidate the Japanese. You might notice one thing about that ship. These modern steel armored battleships, hard to hide back then, wasn't it? What's their fuel? Coal. In fact, Britain, by the time this fleet arrived back to the United States in 1909, Britain had invented a new battleship that made every ship in that fleet obsolete, called the Dreadnought. And Britain's also going to look at this and say, that's really inefficient. We need a better fuel. Oil. Oil. Britain doesn't have oil. I wonder if this is going to lead to problems in the Middle East. Yes, once again, foreshadowing. So now the United States is a world power. Overnight, and that's kind of represented that Roosevelt. Now you have all of these countries coming to the United States. It was already an economic power, but the Navy was becoming very strong. Nothing compared to Britain or Germany, for example. Still had a tiny army, but something bad has come. Okay, I just thought that cartoon was really funny, so. Who else, as a kid, thought there was something hiding in your bed and grab you every time? I did well into my 40s. I still think that. Let's get to the progressives. Now, the progressives, we'll talk about a few things, but we're going to talk about the main tendencies of the progressives. I talked about the populists. Here's Roosevelt, who get the nickname, not really well deserved, of the trust busters. First time using the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up monopolies. So here's Roosevelt, a lot of that buckskin of the Rough Riders, even though that's not how they dressed. Coal trust, beef trust, Standard Oil trust. So let's get to what the progressives were. What are the characteristics? And the thing about it is the progressives, before we get to their characteristics, these are middle class reformers. So these are people that are benefiting from capitalism. They're the new clerks, accountants, sales clerks, or for that matter, the new professors or teachers are moving into this middle class. What's middle class? They make enough money. They have to work, but they make enough money to afford the trappings of this new economic, this new economic life, this new affluence in the United States. Most working class people could not afford this. And that is Trump. Here's Roosevelt. And once again, I'm going to handle the trust. These are people who want to save capitalism. They like capitalism. Remember the populists. These were the workers and farmers, especially the farmers, who felt that capitalism was cheating them and want to reform them. Here, they want to save it. It's reform or revolution, but not revolution by them, revolution by workers. And this is both parties. Both parties. Roosevelt was a Republican. Woodrow Wilson, the other most famous progressive president, was a Democrat. It's both parties. And this shows the appeal of this. Here's Roosevelt and his policies to tamp down revolution. This is Switzerland, Zurich. And you'll notice anarchists. It takes away their argument against capitalism. You reform capitalism, what do the socialists have? What do the anarchists have? At least that's the argument. So the first element, society can improve. Laissez-faire, doing nothing, let competition decide, focuses wealth on top, leaves people behind, people left behind, revolt. So here's like Roosevelt making, it's a speech, a kind of remaking America, and like mixing all kinds of stuff together to make a better country. So the idea is, we just don't have to accept in a country, for the progressive idea, that the only thing that matters is the search for profit and wealth. We can make a better society. Now, we can all disagree with that society is going to be, but we can improve. And we can improve not just for money. But the whole idea is if you make a better society, less chance of revolt. And so, for example of this, progressives believed in voting rights for women. And here, progress and women's rights. Now, most progressives did not believe that women were equal, but they should be allowed to vote. And this kind of pretty condescending, but this song, little sheet music was really a big deal in terms of see, men, she can vote, and they'll probably vote like you. So it's condescending and still social Darwinist. Another one, prohibition. They can get rid of the evils of alcohol that remake society. In fact, many of the progressives went from temperance to banning alcohol completely. And lastly, there was an element in there for civil rights. Remember, I've mentioned before the NAACP and WB. Okay, it should be Dubois, but we always say Du Bois in America. I need it too. And to fight for civil rights and equality. But there was a big element of social Darwinism. Roosevelt was appalled by the Klan and lynching, but he certainly did not believe that people of darker colored skin were equal. He just thought they should be treated better, but it still should be the hierarchy. It's as shown by basic diplomacy. So Roosevelt bought into all the social Darwinistic ideas about race and color of skin. He's just a good example of that. Number two, experts. I know I'm getting to those last two things. Deal with it. You're gonna have to keep going. Experts. This belief that you could have specialized skills, a scientific approach to not just this new technology, but to the country, to the problems of society. This is a little bit like the Enlightenment. We'll take this scientific revolution and put it to society. So we can take these lessons we learned for this new technological revolution of the 19th century and make a better world. That's why you're going to call these new government officials will be technocrats, these experts. And one more thing, it's no coincidence that you will get the era of specialization. All these professional requirements. Hey, if you become a lawyer, what test do you have to pass now? For example, that's a progressive reform. Doctors had to go and prove they went to medical school. You can't just say, I'm a doctor. I'm really fast with the knife. Or for that matter, think about science, where we have biology. I mean, before it was just natural science. And now we have all the different biology or physics or whatever it might be. Think about humanities. Now we have history, sociology, political science, etc., economics. Okay, tomorrow we finish this. I'm glad you like the movie. I think it's I love that movie so much. The only thing a few points out here and there is that that last question. Yeah. We'll say the only meeting that have to be old. Oh no, the Soviets are gonna get it. They literally just destroyed the world. And the first thing they talk about is war, the same stuff. So we'll do a few more notes and then. Alive, marry people. Hold on to this. Purple.
I've seen some die.
Sorry.
No problem.
And nothing failed. I will refuse. You follow the Capitol High School parking fails on Instagram.
The Capitol High what?
Capitol High School parking fails.
No.
You should follow it on Instagram. Pretty funny.
Okay. I'm not on Instagram, but I should look at it. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm serious. Tomorrow, I'm doing this. All right.
That weighs more than me.
Make a play.
I don't know.
It's the carpenter does not relate. Dave, how did you do this?
Oh, that's.
Oh, well, you got it. Oh, well, it's your. Germans.
Oh, Jersey, oh my gosh. I can't wait. I can't wait. It's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah, really. Are you interested? $70 desserts.
That's weird.
Yeah. Like, you're not. Okay. No, it's a problem with my. Well, no, I just, I'm like. Look at. Only thing I feel like, you know, is. I didn't know what you were doing. I'm sure I'll. Seriously, here, I'm. That's good.
Yeah, I know, like. Yeah. Of course, this is the question.
See, this is what next Valentine's Day. No, I feel like okay. I also heard and all the some of the guys think that's
My favorite thing is when people look at it, the things all this on public Instagram, like, look when. Yeah, and he said it. It was, yeah. It was like. I was feel like playing.
What?
What did I say? You.
Yeah.
How is everybody doing? I would really like to say it's good to see you, but I don't know if I can do that. I don't know.
It's underwhelming my eyes.
It's underwhelming.
This last week, we used.